This Finance Committee meeting to order. I have Jennifer Byerly here in the room with me and Leo Kim. And I see Patty McGuire has joined us, Frank, Randy, Sharon, and Kevin. And we have Scott Bauer and Ryan on the phone as well. Our agenda item today is to kind of follow up on the refinancing discussion that we had and move forward with that. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott or Ryan and we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa. And yeah, again, Scott Bauer with Northwest Municipal Advisors. I do have a slide deck. I think you also have a copy of it, but I'll put it up here on the screen for those able to watch online. So if you bear with me for just a second, let me. Okay.
Hopefully they have.
It should be coming up on your screen here. Let's see. So let me, I guess, take through a couple of slides. We have, I think, also a bit of a summary from, I think, what we talked about previously and what we're looking to do on this. But first, let me just get to the bond market. So this, we did update the slides or the charts here. So just again, a reflection of low interest rates currently. Apparently, they went down even a touch more since we last spoke earlier this month. On the next two slides, then, are the debts that we're taking a look at potentially refunding. So all the highlighted debts are currently callable except for the 2011 bonds here, which are not callable until next year. So we'll talk about these in particular on a slide later on in this presentation. But again, the ones we're sort of focusing on are all highlighted here and on the next slide. So some outstanding state loans that you have, all of these highlighted. Some produced more savings than others. For instance, when we looked at it, I think your 2007 and 2014s are at fairly low interest rates, so there wasn't much savings to be netted from those. The 2011 bonds that we saw on the prior page are also associated with your Belfair system. So when we last spoke to the committee, we showed a number of scenarios for refinancing the highlighted debt. And what we showed were based on the current estimated interest rates doing a public bond issuance. So similar to what the county did back in 2017, where we go through and develop an official statement, go through a bond rating process, and then head out to the public market via an underwriting firm. So that's kind of how we looked at it earlier this month. My takeaway from the meeting was that the committee expressed the interest in looking at the scenario where we lower savings equally each and every year. We don't extend the debt and we don't reshape the debt. So if something matures in 2030, if one of the loans does, for instance, we keep that at 2030. If it matures in 2032, same thing. We also wanted to look at exploring the possibility of refinancing this debt via a direct placement loan. So going to more of a commercial type bank, either in the local area or in Washington, and seeing whether we could place that with a bank. So we did reach out to a number of banks and got responses in. Now, these were informal discussions. The banks didn't do any credit work. We talked to them about it. We sent them amortization schedules and said, this is what we're looking at. Give us your best feedback on this. And so I'll show to you in a slide or two the responses at a very high level. But again, for any bank to do a further commitment on this, they would need to do credit work for you. So again, I wanted to keep it generic for now. I didn't want to go through and say, well, look, this bank has great rates, but this bank over here has horrible terms, because again, they need to do their credit work. So again, but we appreciate them providing the information that they did. So this is just a kind of a rule of thumb when we're looking at doing a bank loan versus a bond issuance. So typically they have a bank loan has lower issuance costs but higher interest rates. but they tend to be a kind of a quicker and easier process to go through. So certainly as we start to get into lower and lower amounts, issuance costs tend to overweigh interest rates, and so for lower amounts, you tend to get a lower cost of financing through a bank loan. But of course, as bond size go up, then the fixed costs are spread over a larger issue, and then interest rates generally are kind of win the day on what's the lowest cost of financing. So again, we provided banks with estimated amortization schedules for all those currently callable debts that we showed earlier. We provided separately to them the 2011 bonds because those to us would be a bit of a question as to whether that would be included in the financing now or whether it would be done at a later time. And so what we did ask them was to say, if we waited to do that, what would be, would you somehow fix a rate now, but allow us to fund it at a later date so we could do it with tax-exempt financing? So we do have some feedback on that. But again, some common contrasts, comparisons with a bank loan and the bond issue. In either case, you'll engage your bond counsel to develop a bond resolution. That has to happen regardless whether you do it via a bank placement or a bond issue. What you don't end up doing in a bank loan, of course, is then an official statement. You may go out on a bank loan with an RFP to a variety of banks, or you can call a number of banks in order to try to get a term sheet from them. But frequently, because we see so much variability from bank to bank, the RFP process has worked well for us. In the bond issue, again, that would be really up to the county as to whether to go through that process. You did do that in 2017. You went through an RFP process, you interviewed 3 firms, and then selected a firm for your 2017 bond issue. So of course, you could stick with that same firm if this is the way you'd go, or again, go through a selection process. Doing a bank loan, you don't do a bond rating, so you don't pay for that. You always would when you're doing a public bond sale. And again, what we see is generally, because of the lower interest rates on the bond issue, it generally results in a lower cost of financing. Now, it's going to be close in this case when we look at things, but that's generally what we see. But the time to complete is also more quickly done via the bank loan versus a bond sale. And typically, you're locking in terms with the bank fairly early in the process when you're doing a bank loan, whereas setting interest rates really happens at the tail end of the process when you're issuing public bonds, because there will be a bond sale, and then 2 weeks later, the bonds would close and it's over. So again, later in the process is when you would fix rates on the bond issue. So again, when we reached out to the banks, we got some high-level responses from them. And so here's a summary. So we were taking a look at those highlighted loans and bonds that the county has. Most of them mature by 2032, but the Russellwood debts, there's 2 loans that go out to about 2048. And the feedback that we got was that for Bank A, that 2048 is beyond a little bit their typical final maturity, but they did provide us with rates, and they felt that they could get approval to actually go out to a final maturity of 2048 on a fixed rate basis. Bank B would amortize out to 2035. So for those that Russellwood piece, if it were included in the debt or in the refinancing, the latter part, those maturing, say after 2035, would need to be compressed or made into what we call a bullet, where there'd be a large final maturity. And that may or may not be of interest, but that's what would have to happen here with Bank B. Bank C would go out to 2048. They would fix the rate until 2035, but then after that, the rate would adjust every 5 years until the final maturity of 2048. So there would be a bit of interest rate risk each and every 5 years, but it would be fixed for the first 15. And so the interest rates that we did get from the banks, we got a scale where from Bank A that provided us with different interest rates actually at each and every maturity. So when we blended that together and based on how most of the debt was weighted early, the rate came in at about a 1.88%. Bank B was able to provide us more of a range. And again, this just going out to 2035. They felt that it would likely be at the lower end of the rate. But again, all they could provide to us at the moment was this estimated range of where they thought they would be. And then Bank C provided us with a 2.4%. So when we take a look at the next slide, what I'm going to show you is a comparison then where we actually take Bank A's rates just because they provide the lowest, just so we can say, okay, if that were selected or if there were other banks, again, offering rates and terms at around that amount, where would the savings be? And then we compared that against what we showed to you earlier this month. So these columns here, so this is what you had seen before. So the bonds net present value savings. So again, that takes all the cash flow savings, so the savings that you would get each and every year, and present values them back to today's dollars, just to give you a sense of how much is that worth today if you could actually capture all those savings and put them in your pocket today. So it's a common way we look at the impact of a savings. And then we also compare the savings dollar to the size of the original loan itself for a percentage. So again, this would just be 172,000 divided by whatever amount of bonds we're refinancing. So 9% is a strong refinancing, as is 5%. County policy, however, I believe is a 5% net present value savings. So some of these by policy may not actually be included or make it into a final refinancing unless the county wanted to change that. So again, looking at all the bonds, and we're going to address the 2011 here in a moment. So totaling all of these savings, excluding the 2011 bonds, $874,000 of savings. If we include this $115,000, then $990,000 net present value savings from the estimated bond issue. If we look at the bank loan, again, from the interest rates that we got from the bank, totaling these savings without 2011 bonds, $771,000. If we do include the 2011 bonds, then $1 million, just a little over $1 million of savings. So in total, it compares favorably if the 2011s are included. But as you can see, bank loan savings are generally a little bit less than what we were seeing from an estimated public bond sale, except for the Russellwoods are actually fairly close to each other. Now, the reason we have to table these for a little further discussion, and what these are looking at was on the 2011 bonds, and actually maybe I'll go to the next slide and we can go back to this. So again, the 2011 bonds are not callable until March of 2021, which is 90 days prior to their call date. But then they can be refinanced with tax-exempt debt starting at that point or any point after that. So there's not a particular deadline for you to get something done by these dates that you see here. It's just the earliest opportunity that you could do it. If you were to refinance via the public sale and wanted to lock in today's rates, then that would have to be done with taxable debt. Again, this gets into IRS tax rules, but that's what it would be. So taxable interest rates are higher than tax-exempt interest rates. So using taxable rates, this is what you saw on the prior page, net present value savings of about $115,000. If you waited until 2021, you could refinance it or restructure it, of course, at that point with tax-exempt bonds. But of course, now we're talking 9 months from now. So interest rates, of course, will fluctuate between now and that time. But using current tax-exempt interest rates, the savings is at about $317,000 or 10% of the issue. Now, Bank A did provide an option where you could lock in the rates. So this would be kind of a separate series from the other ones. You'd basically lock in tax-exempt rates. You would close the deal, but you wouldn't actually fund it until the spring of 2021. So you wouldn't accrue interest on the new debt until that point, and you wouldn't technically refinance the old debt until that point. But at that point, again, it would become currently callable, eligible for tax-exempt rates, and the savings then is $234,000. So in between, really, the do it now with taxable debt or wait until later, assuming current market tax-exempt rates, which again can fluctuate between now and 9 months from now. So again, this was an interesting option that we got from Bank A, the ability to do that. And this is the last slide, but again, Ben, I'll be happy to open up to questions and go back to any other slides. But so the county has several bonds or loans that can be refinanced now for savings, and based on the current market interest rates, it looks like the public bond sale provides more when we go, loan by loan. 2011 bonds could be refinanced now in either case that we talked about, or they can certainly be remain outstanding for refinancing later, or simply remain outstanding. And the Russellwood savings look to be similar in either case. And so the next steps would be, of course, to provide any further analysis that you would like to hear about. If at some point then you want to proceed with the refinancing of this debt, then we'd get your bond counsel engaged in the deal, figure out which bonds and loans to include and exclude. If it were a bond issue, then we'd want to select and get the underwriting firm engaged in the process. If it were a bank loan, then we'd have a bit of a choice. Do we develop and send out a request for proposal to multiple banks, or do we target a few banks, all in the hopes of getting a term sheet that we could have in front of us to say, these are the terms that the bank is providing. They've done their credit work, so we could be fairly certain that really this deal is what they would provide. And then finally, of course, develop a financing schedule. And I should say, all the savings that I did show to you earlier, whether it was a public bond sale or the rates from Bank A, they all did assume that the debt would be not callable, in other words, not refinanceable until for 10 years. Again, that's very common on the bond issue side. On a bank loan, we do see variety of prepayment clauses, but in this case, for the lowest rate, no prepayment for 10 years is what it would be. So again, you couldn't refinance the debt until that point. For higher interest rates, you could actually bring in that call date to an earlier period. But again, for the purposes of what we showed you today, we did just look at the lowest rate. And I think that concludes my presentation for today, and I will pause now. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you.
Well, that was a lot of good information, Scott. Thank you. My question is, what do you know typically what credit check a bank would do? What are we looking at? What are they looking for? My audited annual statements? What are they, that process is so much different than getting a rating, so.
Right. I guess what we're not doing in a bank financing process is, we're not putting together a presentation and giving it to a rating agency that then goes to a committee and then, again, charges you a couple $1,000s for the rating. But you'll be sending similar information to a bank. And so a lot of times when we are sending out an RFP to banks or, working with a particular bank, then we are sending along historical financials. So we would send along your most recent audits, which I think take you back to 2018. We'd send then your 2019 and 2020 budgets. Okay. So that's typically what they're looking at.
Okay, thank you. And then just before we get into specifics about these, there was the conversation about possibly adding some additional funding for a project up at the solid waste department or landfill. With a bank loan, do we still have that opportunity to assess more debt in this, or would we want to do that? Depending on, I don't have much details, so I'll let Frank talk about that more, but would there be an issue between a bond versus a bank financing if we were to decide to roll additional funding in here?
So not necessarily. I mean, I think it'd be a similar type of analysis for us to say, which option do you like better? Do you like the flexibility? Do you like the interest rates of one option or the other? I think in this case, solid waste financing. I mean, if you knew when you needed the money and how much you needed, and the plan was to spend down the money, fairly soon. Again, you typically have a 3-year spend down, but I guess all this is to say that you've got a plan to spend it down. It could certainly be included in this if the county wanted to issue it as a GO bond. If the county wanted to issue it as a revenue bond, then that would really be two separate securities and done separately. But again, I don't know if both financing's timing match up the same.
Okay. So I'll open it up to anybody here that has any questions or needs additional information from Scott.
I have questions.
Go ahead, Randy.
Okay, Scott, what is the interest rate that you're thinking that you're going to be able to pull out with the bonding?
Yeah, so I looked at that let me scoot back here a little bit. The true interest cost I was getting, which compares my estimated underwriting fees and interest rates, was actually just a little bit below the bank financing that I saw. So I am coming in at a 183 true interest cost.
Okay, 183.
Right.
And you had mentioned on the 10-year for refinancing, but what about on a bank loan concept? What about a buy down, so to speak? Not the same as an early payoff, but the idea that you're paying off part of your principal.
Oh.
And even when there's an early payoff fee or penalty, they'll still usually let you pay off your principal without that penalty. Would that be the same with this?
Yeah, I should say so. Yeah, in the case of a bond issue, okay, well, I guess let me back up two things. So we do have an amortization schedule laid out there. So the expectation is that you will be paying regularly principal and interest payments, as we've structured them.
Yes.
If you want to pay additional principal, in the case of a bond issue, then you are placing that money into an escrow until the maturity date of the payment.
Yes.
In the case of a bank loan, in the case of Bank A, they do have what they call a yield maintenance fee. So there would be a fee associated with paying off the principal early. So you could do it. It's just if you spent $5,000, maybe you end up paying off $4,000 of principal, depending on the fee. But they do allow for prepayment with penalty up until the 10-year mark, and then after that, you're free and clear to prepay as much as you want.
Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say that is there's always a likelihood with the connections that we have with the legislature that we are able to pick up $2,000 or $2 million or $5 million to pay down debt. And if we're stuck at 10 years with the other, that's a problem. But if we're not stuck with a bank to where we can pay down some of that principal, that still may be extremely beneficial for us.
It could be, but yeah, I think we would really, if there was an expectation in the next couple of years that you would get that kind of amount for prepayment, we really should seriously consider shorter prepayment terms or something maybe more flexible. I guess beyond that, I believe you're going out for additional public works trust fund loans. I don't know whether that money, if it's again for Belfair or other things, if that could be deployed to other loans, state loans that you could call earlier.
We've been wishing for that, but I don't think, I haven't seen it since I've been here when it comes to any of these loans that we're talking about ever be a viable option.
So again, I think my point on that is I would be worried about, locking in these rates, bond issue or bank loan at these rates, at these, no prepayment, and then thinking that you are going to get, several $1 million to prepay. It can happen, and we could calculate out what that fee would be and whether it would make sense to do. But you should really, I think that it's not prepayable for 10 years, even though you can do some prepayment with penalty.
Yeah. But you can also ask the bank to put that into their proposal, and we can see what that looks like to make a final decision.
That's absolutely correct. We could say, please provide us your rates at, assuming no prepayment for 10 years and assuming prepayment, after 5 years, after 1 year, or any time. Yes, you could ask for that. Absolutely.
And just to make clear, I'm not talking about full prepayment. I'm talking about, in case we decide to go that route, options. Percentage that at 2 years we can have this option, at 5 years we can have this option. But not pay it off just to pay down some of the principal, because we're not going to be able to pay it off. That's not even really an option, I don't think.
Got it.
Kevin, do you want to talk a little bit more about the solid waste project, or give us a little more information on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't really have any numbers or projects in mind. I floated this to Frank a week ago or so ago, and I know we have a laundry list of items that are, that need to be taken care of at the solid waste, at the transfer stations and that kind of thing. And so I don't really have, beyond that, any additional information other than I wanted us to have a conversation with the utilities about what their plans are, what it might cost, and then what opportunities might exist for financing now. And so we have obviously yet to have that briefing since I had the conversation with Frank. And so I don't really have anything of value to add at the moment.
Kevin, do you actually have any kind of number at all? Because, like, for example, with a bank loan, Scott can correct me if I'm wrong, but we can go for an additional $1 million on the bank loan and literally divvy it out how we need to. But if we're talking $3 million, that's a lot of risk. Do you happen to have any idea what kind of money we're talking?
Outside of what
I can add.
There you go. Let Frank go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I spoke with utilities during the week, and they're trying to pull all their numbers together, but a real broad stroke was somewhere between $3 and $5 million.
Wow. Yeah.
That was for some for the recycling upgrade, plus some deferred maintenance items.
Yeah, that's what I heard when I asked them also. They said 3 to 5. Zach took me out there. It was pretty interesting to see what they had plans for, but the big chunk of change.
But boy, just my opinion, but before we start doing that, I definitely want to see some type of repayment and where the revenues would come to pay something that large off. I'm not saying that we couldn't do it. I like the idea, and I'd rather have that conversation if we're going to go out, and especially with the bank. Because I really like that idea. I hope we consider that. But I got to tell you, I'd like to see what their repayment plan would look like, how they would pay it back out of their specific funds.
Right, and that's kind of why I was saying I thought it was a little premature to, numbers to projects and that kind of thing. I think waiting to see kind of a more, obviously not a final plan from them, but get a better snapshot from what, what's realistic, what's necessary short term, and how we pay for it. I think we need to have that sort of capital facilities conversation with them again before we're too far down the road on this.
Hey Scott, if we let's just say we go with something like this and we set up to do this route, once it gets established and we do something if we decide to do it with a bank, it'd be fairly easy for you to do another one that, $3 million, $3.5 million, and that'd be for us to figure out how the payment on that, if we decided to do it, you'd already have it established. Would it be easier at that point?
Well, again, I guess depending on the timing, I mean, if you said that you wanted to include $3 to $5 million and more new money with a general obligation, I mean, that could easily be folded in right now. It doesn't sound to me like that's maybe the timing. Now, if you're saying, we do what we've talked about today with a bank, and then come along 6 months from now or something and have more, I mean, it'll be a new process. Of course, you'll establish something with that bank.
Yeah.
I think given that amount of money, I think at the same time, we probably, ask that bank to provide their best foot forward, and then also explore a couple of other banks just to make sure, the market hasn't changed on us, and, maybe somebody's providing better cost of funds.
Yeah, and their requirement may not be as far out either for repayment. They may have a shorter term, we don't know.
Right, yeah, and that's, and I'm not expecting, say that they want to repay in 10 years, but, a lot of banks actually offer loans on a fixed rate basis out to 10 years. Banks start to fall off once we start to go past that on a fixed rate basis. So yes, if depending on different term, different structure, other banks maybe have an appetite for that type than others.
So I think for this discussion, I want to take off that question of whether or not we're going to roll in funding for solid waste. It's just too soon to know for sure how long that project's going to take and where they're going to be, and just focus on what we've been working on going forward right now. We can always come back and do that as a separate financing, or do that with some other financing if we need to do more.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly a significant enough dollar figure that you've spoken about, because that would justify its own financing if it didn't match up with this one. So I wouldn't hesitate to say that it's two separate processes here. If you were saying that it's $200,000, then you might try to find a way to fold that into this, but that's not the amount we're talking about here.
Also, it gives us, if we were to do something like that, the whole payment plan, the whole thing would be done under a specific line and a specific entity, being a utility or solid waste. So it would make sense to do it separate in the loan anyway. Madam Chair, I have a preference. Do you mind if I share that?
Well, you can share it, sure.
So in looking at the different options, I actually like the idea of because of the flexibilities that especially that may be able to come about, I like the idea of the bank loan with the roll-in of the 2011 at the same time. Those make sense to me. That also gives us the greatest savings overall. According to those numbers, it even gives preferred savings with a lot less risk on the bond market or anything either. But I'd sure like to see what kind of thing they can come up with for possible early payments and see what kind of damage that could create.
Okay.
And this is Ryan, and I just want to mention that if rates, if we go out and rates happen to come in much higher than we've quoted today, you are under no obligation to accept those rates. Right. It is something that we can always reject all rates and then take it out to like a public bond market later on, especially in a refunding issue where you have the debt outstanding. As long as you continue to make your payments, there's really no rush to do the deal unless it makes sense for the county.
Thank you, Ryan. I was going to mention that. So thank you for bringing that up. So that is a good point. If when we do go out to the banks and something comes back and we don't accept them, then we would still have that option. So that's good to know. Sharon, as a committee member, what are your thoughts?
If I can find my unmute. I like looking at the cost savings. I really like what we're seeing there. That's quite substantial. I would like to see what, I agree with Randy, I'd like to see what the prepayment penalty would be. But I do like the cost savings. The $1 million really, that caught my eye for sure.
So I just want to mention, so the debt policy does say that you don't refinance, that we shouldn't refinance if it's less than 5%, but you can do an override of that, when it makes most sense to the county. So some of these don't, there's, one or two that come in one for sure that just comes in under the 5%. But there's another, the 2014 DOE loan that really doesn't provide much savings at all. I would, we could take that out.
Yep.
Don't know what's currently owing on that one. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lisa. We would not include 2007 or 2014.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Lisa, it's Patty. Do you know the policy on 5%, how old that is? I mean, you know, 5% when interest rates were 18%, less than 5% today.
Right. So, Patty, I don't know. I mean, it's been in our policy for a long time. It's been rewritten a couple times. That is standard practice.
Yeah,
at the
I was
low
just
end,
curious.
so,
I mean, it's not a deal killer at all.
But
I was just curious.
the policy also allows for us to go outside of that when it makes sense. So it's not like it's a firm, you know, amount. Certainly when it makes sense. I don't think it makes sense to do the 2014 DOE loans. There's $116,000 left on that one. Is that correct?
I agree with you, Lisa.
Yeah.
I think the 2007, 2014 we would not include. You know, I think given how close some of these are to the 5% savings threshold, you know, I would say at the very least we present that to, again, if we're looking at the bank financing, we present that to the banks. We run the numbers, we see where the net present value savings ends up, and again, if it's close to 5 and the county wants to waive the policy, great, we include it. If you want to then, based on those rates, again, exclude it, then we can pull it from the refinancing.
Right.
So this might be a silly question, but are there some that we could just go ahead and pay off?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, I think if you can still see the presentation, let me back up a little bit.
You know, like on page 5?
Yeah, so I'm looking at page 4 and page 5. So given the call dates here, so we are past the date on all of these, again, excluding the 2011. So anything you see in green, and the 2019 Olson building here, that can be prepaid at any time. So any of these loans, except for the 2011s, could be paid either in part or in whole with county cash if you wanted to pay them off. That's absolutely correct. And then let me just go to the next one. And then same thing, generally the state loans, you can prepay at any time. But again, you know, because of the interest rate here on the 2007s, that would not be included in a refinancing. As we said, you know, the amount here and, you know, and actually the resulting savings, it didn't look like much was happening on the 2014. But again, if you have the cash and you want to pay it down, you do have that option, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know where the cash would come from, Sharon, since, you know, they're bill fair. So,
Right?
so I don't know where that cash would come from unless there was something from the legislature, you know, some funding mechanism that would give us that ability at this point, or we would have some other resource to pay those off. I don't think Belfair has the ability to pay them off at this point.
No, I don't either. I was wondering about, you know, maybe some of the others, like the Olson building, but then again, I'm, you know, where would we get the money?
The Olson building, I mean, you're currently paying out of REAP funds. You could pay that off with REAP funds. I don't know what that budget looks like, but you could pay that off.
If I can interject for a moment, there's money available that could be available under the sales use tax 09 fund, and maybe some funds in REIT to pay down, again, both of those to pay down Belfair debt.
Yeah. That is the other option. You're right, Frank. I can't speak to those. I don't know what those budgets look like and what you're thinking.
I just prepared the 09 fund budget for next year, and there's about $1 million of ending fund balance left there, so that might be an option to talk about if the board would look at using that as a funding source.
Patty, did you have any questions or suggestions then?
No, I think, you know, obviously the cash on the table is pretty darn appealing. you know, and I am agnostic on bond market versus bank loan. I just don't have much to add on that. So, but you know, with the exception of those two that are close to payoff, it certainly makes sense to me to go ahead.
Jennifer, do you have budget-wise? Do you have anything that you would be concerned about?
No, I agree with Frank that paying off the that smaller, the L004 or L0405 would be a good option, and then I think paying off the interfund loan that we have for building 8 would be ideal for 2021.
I do agree with you on that.
Hey, Jen, we're having some trouble hearing you.
Oh, sorry about that. I think that the interfund loan would be a good option to pay off in the 2021 budget, and we could probably just use ending fund balance and current expense to do that.
So Patty, just for reference, it's not included on here, but the county has an interfund loan with Public Works for the purchase of the building 9? Building 8, which is what where community services and the health department is. So we were buying that building back. There's not much left on that, so it would be something that would be nice, but it's outside of this and could be done with current expense monies if it's available. But it wasn't included in here, so it might throw Patty off that we're having this conversation.
I just wanted to throw that in since we were talking.
But I would agree that I think, Scott, we should move forward and see if we can't get some firm numbers from some banks to start the process there, and then if we have to backtrack and go to the bond market, but let's see where this leads us. These are some really good numbers currently.
Okay, we can do that. So again, because of the variability in the bank loan, I think we'd suggest putting together an RFP that we can send out to banks so that they have all the same information,
right,
and see what we can get. I will say that I think the banks that we talked to and the Bank A, they have been very competitive in the municipal market here in Washington State. But nevertheless, we won't know if there's others who'd want to participate without doing an RFP. So that's what I would suggest here.
I agree with that.
Okay.
Sounds good.
I don't know that I need a motion. I think for the Finance Committee to move forward to do an RFP. But I think let's go ahead, that's where we'll go here. I really like the idea if we can do a bank loan to roll this LTGO bond in there, the 2011s, and then grab that money later and have that locked in. I think that's a really great idea if we can do that. So.
Okay. Yeah, and I found also then I think there was a desire to kind of get a variety of prepayment options so you can have those in front of you as well.
Exactly.
Okay. We will get going on that. We'll also reach out to your bond counsel, also let them know what's going on, and probably in parallel with then doing an RFP, we'll have bond counsel start to develop a bond resolution. Okay. Typically, we would send a draft of the bond resolution as part of the financing package that we would send out.
I agree. Are there any other questions or discussion for the Finance Committee or any of the of our guests that are here?
I have one. I hope nobody shoots me for this. As you know, I like this idea. I'm the one that asked for the bank thing, but I'd like to throw one more thing for everybody to consider. We've been talking for a few years now when it comes to the new jail and the concept of the new jail. I've never been one that believed that we were ever going to go out to the public and be able to get the money that's necessary for that. I've always been the one that I've talked to Frank and all that our solution may be more like a $10 million addition to the current jail that we have, taking over that next part of that block over there. I'm curious if anybody would be willing to let, since he's already doing all this, and he's doing an incredible job, by the way. You guys are wonderful. I very much appreciate you. I'd be curious to see what they come back with a construction type loan of about 10 million, just to see what it looks like. Preliminary, just them asking around, since they're already asking around, so that we could maybe have that conversation next quarter or beginning of the year or something. I see your head shaking. Like I said, don't hit me.
It's a great idea. I mean, we have so much on our plates, Randy, that again, just like solid waste, we don't have, I think you really have to have some good numbers and a good timeline, because you can't go out and borrow money without a specific timeline in which you could spend it. So it's not like we can have all this money and hold on to it without having to pay for that. So I don't know.
Well, that's why I was asking for a construction line of credit, construction loan, just an idea of what they're talking. I definitely don't want to borrow the money now, but to have that as an option, then we can make a decision of whether we want to go for that line of credit or that construction loan, so to speak, where they charge us interest as we borrow the money down.
I'm gonna overrule that and just say I would want to look at it separately. That's a lot of money and a specific kind of project.
I would say let's go with what we have before us now, and then we can move forward.
I would agree with that. So, Scott, my takeaway from today is we're going to start an RFP process to banks to look at how they would, what their terms would be in refinancing some of this current debt. And you'll contact bond counsel, or did you want me to contact them?
We're happy to do it, Lisa, if you'd like.
All right. All right. Is there anything else? I'm afraid to ask. Not that it's not a good idea, Randy. I don't need to shoot you down.
That's all right. I was here.
Project.
Since he was there, since he was already talking to him, I was just curious the numbers we could get that I couldn't get from the street.
There you go. All right, then I will adjourn today's meeting, and then as soon as I have something from Scott and Ryan, I will get back to the committee and we'll call another meeting if necessary, all right?
Sounds good.
All right.
Sounds good. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you all.
All right,
Great job.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.